everybody, for sticking around for our program. Thank you to everybody online. We know the rain is tricky and it's hard to get out. So thanks for joining us that way. Now, we have with us from the Pathways program, Josh Acevedo, right? Did I get it right?
No, I say Azevedo. That's how the Portuguese in California where I grew up. That's how we all say. It's like Smith in Portuguese. Say Azevedo.
See, and I come from the Spanish people.
You say it?
Okay. So it's here to speak to us about addiction. And this is supposed to be a conversation. So I'm going to preemptively say, feel free to talk back and ask questions as he's presenting so that we have that conversation about our students and the dangers and the things we need to watch for. All right, and I'm going to step out of the frame, step in front of the frame and get out of the way.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here and I'd love to talk about this. I have been doing this. I started working in this field in 1996. I sobered up after going to a rehab facility in 1993. So it started with my own experience. And that's what got me into the field. And that's what drives a lot of us that work in this field into is the desire to give back. One of the first things that you learn in recovery and people who get long-term stable recovery is it's really predicated on helping others find their way into recovery. And that's what stabilizes. So that drew my interest to the field. And so I've been doing it since 1996, and I've worked in hospital settings and outpatient settings, residential settings, and I currently run an intensive outpatient program. We do a lot of work with school districts, primarily in the East Valley, Chandler and Tempe, because that's where we are. We work with Mesa and Gilbert at Eastern also. And so we do a lot of different education. I do like to do a discussion. The reason I say that is because what people are looking for is often different. Last week, I did a speaking engagement and it was all parents who have adult addicted children. That's a very different conversation than talking to the school district. Recently, I did dentists. We did 3 hours of education. And they want statistics and facts and what exactly, how much of these opioids are people using. And I said, we can cover some of that. A lot of that is really readily accessible though, by me giving you a few websites. And in my opinion, we talk a lot about that and you see a lot of that on whether it be social media or commercials. You hear this many people are addicted in the country. This many are dying of overdoses. And that's true. We just need to know it's a lot. And if you want the numbers, I'll leave them with you. If you want to know that, I'll tell you where to look them up. But I think more important is to talk about what's going on with kids. And I like to give the stuff that's most currently relevant. Hearing from kids, the kind of questions that I get from parents when I talk to parents, and just a simple overview of addiction. How do people get addicted? What happens? What does an addiction look like? And then I want to open up questions. And if you want me to talk the whole time, I will. I got a head full of information, but I would rather not. I think you'll learn more if we have a discussion. So I'm going to give just a couple of quick pictures of what an addiction looks like, because it can happen to anybody. And I'd like to dispel that first, is it does not matter rich or poor, black or white, anywhere else. We have addiction in America is a huge issue. And it goes in every neighborhood, every school district, and it typically starts when they're kids. Most of the adult addicts that are in prisons, that are attorneys, strung out on pain pills, whatever they are, most of them started as youth. And that's because that's when we're most vulnerable to picking up an addiction before our brains are fully developed. So we talk about if we can start to attend to it younger or prevent it, we're way better off. And it's much easier to treat, I believe, when you have a kid dealing with prevention than somebody who's had a 25-year addiction. They've had a lot that's gone on. But I'll give you just a couple of stories from, I like to use my most current. I had a meeting yesterday with a young man who's 28 years old who I saw him, I guess, 8 years ago. And he's there's different types of stories we get. He's a Brophy alum, smart as a whip, sharp kid, and came in, had an opioid problem, and had 7 years clean and sober. Came back to see me yesterday after a whole lot of success. Has been relapsing for a couple of months. And what he says, sitting in my office, he's shaking, and I can't stop. I'm using fentanyl and meth every 30 minutes. I have everything to lose. I have a fantastic relationship with an engineer. And he's saying to me, she's the one, and I know it. I know I have reason to do it. I gotta go back. He's been in detox 3 times in the past month. This gets a hold of somebody, it is serious, even after some time in recovery. Typically, if somebody really has the addictive personality, really been taught, they're not going to be able to use well for the most part, probably for the rest of their lives. This is going to stop me at a question I always ask. How many of you have known somebody with alcoholism or an addiction? It's pretty common that just about everybody in the room raises their hand. So you have some idea of what this looks like. I'm going to give one of the other side stories. So I also say a young man, he's 40 now. He's been along.
You can say young man at 40.
Okay, all right. He's also one of our alumni, and he came to visit. And when we saw him, he went all the way to high school. He was a football player. Everybody knows him, right? Everybody's sort of this high school and sports are absurd. Hamilton High School football player, over 4-point grade average, got a microbiology degree at ASU, did the whole thing using every day. The wheels didn't fall off for him until he was 26. Comes from a really stable, happy family. And I know the family, the father speaks regularly now about this. This is not a kid that was raised with a lot of trauma. There was not tough things happening in his home. He just, the football team, they like to smoke pot. He smoked pot, he started doing coke, taking pills, doing whatever he could. And he says he doesn't remember anything about ASU. He came out with a microbiology degree, he doesn't remember being there hardly. He's now a master's degree, he audits treatment facilities all over the US. So people do recover from it also. I like to just kind of give it, it's very serious, it's a disease. People recover a lot too. But it isn't typically the kids that you think, because a lot of times you get asked, these kids that have had really bad lives, I get asked that a lot. I got asked by a treatment professional this week, do all kids who end up with substance abuse problems have a lot of trauma? And the answer is no, they really don't. Some kids do. I get a really wide range. So the commonalities that we see, so it's not necessarily that. It's not that you come from a really hard life. The commonalities that we see are the same things that you would read in the AYS. You guys are familiar, I'm sure. There's in the youth survey. I'm sure they reference it for different things. And this is the same stuff that kids have been telling me for 26 years. It's different versions of, you find out, why do you use? First and foremost, the answer is still the same. It's fun. It makes me feel good. That's the same answer as it's always been. And it is true. It's one of the most important things to validate with kids when you talk to them. It is fun. I used to do drugs. Some of you probably did too. I won't make you answer that in front of them. But these days, dealing with the kids that I'm dealing with, there's a lot. We're now in a generation where a lot of the parents have also used. A lot of them grew out of it. They didn't use seriously, but they have at least messed with THC. They've definitely probably alcohol. And some have done considerably more than that through their college years or from their high school. So, but that's one of the things that's important to validate the kid always when you're talking to them is it is fun. It doesn't feel good. That's why it's dangerous. That is really the issue. That's the problem. And one of the things that happens a lot is kids get blasted with, don't do this because all of the consequences. And it's really hard for that to land on kids a lot of times because of they're just not developed to a place where they can understand consequences. And I'm sure you guys have had speakers that talked about that. I'll touch on it for a second, but our brains don't finish developing until we're some point in our mid-20s. But the part of us that is the governor that stops, that can slow down the speed is the last part to develop. So if you have something that is high reward that you can't see the consequence for, the consequence is likely to come longer term. Because most people don't go out, use high potency THC, and then their whole life falls apart next week. What they actually experience is they go out, they use high potency THC, they go, that felt really good, and nobody caught me. And then I do it for a few months. And by the time I've been doing it for 6 months, it's the first time I get caught. And the consequence isn't that bad. Because they say your whole life's going to fall apart. But it's really, I got grounded. And then I complained so much that my mom got tired of it and shortened my grounding. So the consequences are not, they don't tend to hit really hard. So and the long-term ones are really hard for them to see. So it's really easy to build a group where I'm doing something that feels good. And it seems to be creating a lot of other payoffs. The other reasons that they typically say is it helps socially. It helps me deal with things I'm uncomfortable. Kids have a lot of anxiety, right? Regular, not necessarily clinical, diagnosable anxiety, just life anxiety that they're supposed to have about their identity, about what they're going to be when they grow up, about grades, about fitting in. And now add on, hope you guys are talking about this a ton, just pile on differently than we had. They have the social media. That is a source of huge amounts of all kinds of mess. I don't want to also spend the whole time talking about that, but it just heaps on for kids. So if you have something that relieves that, goes, oh, I feel a lot better. You'll go, well, this works, and you buy in. Short term, it's all payoff a lot of times, and then it's payoff versus consequential. Take the payoff. It goes with this. So that is typically why kids start. Still, they hear that it's fun. There's a really low perception of harm about it. We went from, and kids today, if you look at the AYS and what I'm asking kids regularly, they're starting with THC more than typically had been alcohol for a long time. But what I'm seeing right now is that more and more are starting with THC. We have made it really approachable. It's easier to get than alcohol unless the alcohol is in the home. Then they can, maybe get it out of the cabinet. But getting a edible, a gummy, something kids are bringing it to school really regularly. It's in a lot of homes. And what do? We move from this is medicine, right? Which in America we hear medicine, think good, whether it is or not. But we just do that, like, oh, that should be good. I go into schools regularly and I'll ask kids in assembly sometimes and tell me one thing you guys know about marijuana. And for years, inevitably, I would get, and I go, what? It cures cancer. But that's the kind of information that they have, right? These are the kind of things that they're hearing, whether mom and dad are telling them or not. That's the kind of stuff that they hear. Well, it's medical, it's medicine. And then we make that jump into, now it's recreation. Recreation is fun, right? This is something that people do for fun, right? This is the place that we have it. So we lessen the perception of harm big time, right? So there's not a huge perceived harm in it. So I'm going to do it without realizing how good it's going to make me feel and why I would want to repeat that. And I like to use this as an example because I think that it's really simple and it shows the difference between an adult and an adolescent bond. But, if for most of us, I always get people who are an exception to this. I'll ask this question, like, who in here would rather eat some kale? If I had a handful of kale or a donut, and inevitably there's always somebody that's like, I'll take the kale. You're weird. But the reason, though, that I think that some adults would take the kale, me included sometimes, because we understand the long-term consequence. I understand the donut tastes better and will give me more right now. But I understand also I'd like to live as long as possible. So, I'm going to eat, I'll take some kale too when I have to, But we weigh that decision out. But typically, if you just ask which one do you like better, they're going to go with the donut or the cake or whatever, right? And that's simple. That's human nature. That's what's happening with them a lot. Is they're doing something that feels good and like, I want to repeat that. And our brains set us up to do that. So we'll do that again. That felt good, right? Now compare it to regular things that make you feel good, right? Something, playing baseball, playing music, you do that versus what your brain does when you hit it with high potency THC. The THC feels better, And I remember I played sports and did all kinds of fun things as a kid. When I started smoking pot, and that was pot. That was not high potency THC, right? In the early 90s when I was using it. And it felt better than getting a good hit playing baseball. It made me laugh for hours. An A on a test didn't do that. An A on a test is an esteemable action, right? You feel good about it. You work towards what so we're supposed to feel good about it in life. But it got dwarfed by something that was high dopamine like that. Then you add a little methamphetamine and you go, oh, that felt way better. Then an A on a test, that was really cool. And I didn't go to jail. So I'm going to do that again. Now that A on the test becomes a little bit less important, right? Your priorities start to shift without you even knowing. Even if you're saying the whole time, I'm never going to be like, I grew up in the Bay Area. I was never going to be like the guys on the streets in San Francisco, right? And I knew what that looked like. I've been in all those districts. I spent time there. I bought drugs up on Haight-Ashbury and all that, and I'm never going to be like that. So but you don't know what you're missing. That's most people, if you ask them as adult, did you intend to end up alcoholic addict? And the answer is never yes. Maybe I shouldn't say never. I don't know that I've ever heard anybody say yes. Maybe there's somebody out there that has. Okay, that's what I want to be when I grow up, but I don't think so.
Might be getting to this.
Yeah.
What do you do then when your kid is, the brain isn't developed, they don't understand consequences, they think it's fine? How do you convince them, like, the scare tactics don't work? You could give them all the education, you could make them read everything, but they don't think it's gonna happen to them.
Let's go that way, and I'll quit talking about this because that's the stuff I would rather talk about. So the education I think is worth giving to somebody anyway, even if you know it's not going to totally land. What I think goes the furthest. I've worked with prevention agencies also for years and years and years. I think what goes the furthest, get a chance if you can to look up Dr. Milkman and the stuff that he did in Iceland for drug prevention. So, and I'll give you a link, Dr. Milkman. He did drug prevention in Iceland. And we did some grants to the governor's office of youth, faith, and family here a few years ago, kind of based on his work. It's really cool. But what I'm gonna drive at is the best protective factors that we know of, ones that I see work best. The best inoculation, I think, against substance use is high self-esteem, but real self-esteem. I think that gets misinterpreted sometimes by some parents because
See, I finish your thought, but the self-esteem, how then does the social media kill that
I think
self-esteem?
it pushes a ton. And this gets into really varying parenting stuff. I'm gonna throw out some things to think about rather than if you didn't do this, because I can't be the expert on that. I can tell you what I think based on the kids that I see. So building of self-esteem a lot of times comes from esteemable actions. Right? And so sometimes I think we get a lot of kids whose parents and teachers have tried this thing. They're really great and trying to set them up for things all thinking that that's what's going to build their self-esteem rather than building resilience. You can handle difficult things, right? And there's the difference between, you did something wrong, you need to go own up, apologize, and take the consequence. And you need to not do that again, but I'm going to get you out of the consequence. And so I'm going to use an example here. I actually use two because I saw this week. I found it interesting. I saw a comedy thing. Me and Chris Rock talking about this, and this stood out to me. This whole set. He said his kid got in trouble drinking, and he actually told the school to throw her out. And I thought that is what more parents need to do. So in the Chandler School District, 4 of the schools, if you get suspended for substance use, you can reduce your suspension if you come get an evaluation by facility. Most of the parents that come in, they're great at telling their kid, "You're so loved, you're a great kid, you're this and that." But when they come in, they blame the school, they blame everybody else. And I know that kid is I'm likely to see that kid, a lot of these in treatment in a year or two, because I know the parents are doing it for them, they're defending them from the consequences. They're not encouraging the building of resilience, right? And being able to handle discomfort, and how do you cope with discomfort and coming alongside of them as an ally, but they're trying to help them avoid the discomfort, partially because it's also making them uncomfortable. Right? Because if we don't do that as parents, we're going to have to get uncomfortable to help them build self-esteem. It's because we get uncomfortable when they are. I don't like it when the kids are uncomfortable. I want to fix it and make them feel better. I have to work against that at times. And so the building self-esteem when it comes to social media, a lot of times, my suggestion would be delay as long as possible. And a lot of kids today do think that smartphones are a right. I don't believe that they are in any way, shape, or form. I can tell you my kid had to buy her own, earn the money to do that. And still she's not on any social media. She's about to be 18. But they will come at you. Kids come at you fiercely when they think everybody's doing something, right? There is this pressure on parents. I'm the only kid who doesn't have TikTok and access to it 24 hours a day and $1,000 phone in my pocket, Mom. The only one. You're humiliating me. I have no self-esteem because of what you're doing. And they believe it at the time. So, a lot of times it takes being a parent rather than friend to help build that esteem. But I think a lot of what we tell parents whose kids are in recovery, who we're working with, is constantly encourage, I know you can do this on your own. I will help just as much as you need, but let them work things through. I will help you get tools to do so, but I won't do it for you. Some of the other places I know self-esteem can be built is in the things that they're passionate about. And that's one of the things that they did in Iceland is lots of access to positive, social, I think as much access to their peers in a positive way as possible, and also lets you put boundaries in the negative ways. Because that's a lot of where they push a lot. Is I want to be with this friend. That's my best friend. That's my family. I know this kid is a terrible one. So am I kidding? But well, that's I don't think they're all doing it. I just think it's tougher. I think kids perceive it that way, and I know that it's happening a lot. I work in the school districts. I know they're dealing with a lot of kids are vaping. My daughter dealt with it on the club swim team, right? This is supposed to be kids that they're all super fit, highly competitive. She swam club for years, right? But she was, by the time she was probably 12, maybe 13, she was regularly hearing about vaping, nicotine, THC, and some of the things she'd come home and ask us what she was hearing about sex. And I was like, how are you even hearing about this age? That's coming from those smartphones, social media, where they're learning that stuff. And so, again, I don't go out and say never let a kid have a smartphone, but I do think it is worth thinking about their access to this stuff, because it's like a drug. And a book I'm going to suggest to all of you, and I had a copy and I forgot to bring it. Let's take a picture of it. I have been pushing my staff to read it, parents to read it. Dr. Anna Lemke out of Stanford wrote a book called Dopamine Nation. And I really encourage any parent to read it. I think having a copy around, she really makes the dopamine nation. She makes the way that the dopamine mechanism in our brain works when it comes to things really clear. So she talks a lot about smartphones, social media, and how these things are addictive and how it primes the brain. So we talk about that a lot with kids who end up on drugs. A lot of times their brains are already primed. They're already used to doing things that release high dopamine with the least amount of work as often as they can. And so you want to escalate. You want to get to more dopamine, more dopamine. I don't want to spend too much time on the brain, but I'm going to say this. It goes with the self-esteem and some of this. One of the things that happens for adolescents is also, you've all heard that that time in life is they're meant to seek novel experience, right? This is the breaking away time, the becoming an adult. This is when in older societies, there were rites of passage time and things like that. We don't have a lot of rites of passage in the US, but that was a becoming an adult, becoming a man, becoming a woman. There was some kind of thing you did. You went out into the woods for a few days, or you did something, right? We don't have a lot of that, but it is a time where they're going to seek more novel experience. One of the things is there's a time where they will get less out of regular experiences anyway. We did a lot of that with our daughter. We encourage parents to do that at times, to go, there's times where you're not going to be able to feel as much pleasure anyway, because the changes your brains are going through. So they seek more novel things. So it's okay to meet that and go, what kind of novel things can I give you access to that are positive? That's a great way to build subsidies. I will go out of my way. I tell parents all the time, spend your time and money, maybe rather than on $1,000 phone on some, take them regularly to do things they think are super cool, even if they're kind of annoying to you. I will take you and your friends, to this thing you want to go to that I think is dumb. There you go. And that's it, because it's novel. It's a positive way to bring about something novel and to have. Remember this. Remember in the schoolyard how important it is to have a war story. You guys all remember that, right? In your 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th grade, to have some kind of story. It doesn't even have to be negative. It doesn't have to be we were chased by the police. It could be me and my friends did this, or we stayed up all night, or we went on this road trip, and my parents took us all to Disneyland. When you have a story to tell, you feel good about it, right? And you have an experience like that sticks with you. So it's many of those that can be created for a kid that are positive. The more the better, as far as I'm concerned, because they do build some, I think, identity and some sense of self-esteem, and it gives parents a chance to engage as much as possible. And I know kids push back a lot. They don't want you super engaged, but I believe in the opposite. Through all the years of counseling families, I think I can even tell you this: the kids who we treat for addictions and substances, the ones who had really, really engaged parents that had a lot of boundaries, really spent a lot of time on right from wrong. You have to pay your own consequences. We're engaged, maybe on the stricter side, they're easier to reach. The ones who develop the more entitled attitudes, I can get away with whatever to some degree. The boundaries in my life are fake. My mom always says I'm grounded a week. They always only last 3 days. Those kids are harder to reach in counseling. Guarantee it. I cite hundreds and hundreds of cases where that is the case. If you're going to have a boundary with the kid, one of my suggestions is drive it as a stake in the ground. So choose your battles wisely. I don't know that I would have 100 boundaries, but if you have 10, they need to be a stake in the ground. You're going to lose that phone for 6 months. If I find pornography on it, 6 months. If it's 3, the messages that get sent, that's what we get a lot. Anyway, and you guys have seen that, I'm sure, anyway, in schools and in society in general. And I'm a big believer. And if people don't know where they stand, that means you don't know where you stand. That means the boundaries are always negotiable. So you don't know where you stand. The kid doesn't know where they stand. They will argue to figure it out. They will push up against the boundary to find out where it is. Right. And so that's not, it doesn't have to be punitive or anything. Just what I said, I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to have that integrity, and it allows them to kind of believe that they're real. Again, I believe that creates security and reduces anxiety. I know where I stand. I know what's acceptable. I know it's not acceptable. It's going to happen. Kind of back to the Chris Rock thing, getting thrown out of school. These are the rules. You don't get to get out of them, because I like that he said that, because you're rich, your dad's famous. Good for him. I thought that was cool. So that's it. Does that start to answer your question a little bit about the self-esteem? The education is important. I think helping them to build resilience in any way you can. Positive, pro-social, positive social outlets, as many as you can help them find. Things that they can be passionate about and create novel experience. I think is a good idea. And then anything else that they might like. I mean, there's, we've read books as a family, that we can get into discussions about because we're all reading it. I've seen a lot of families do things like that. We go, what kind of things can we do as a whole? We do this together for our health, or we do this together at the gym, or things to engage them with that will build them up, and less downtime for the scrolling.
So I see a lot of this can help, like with younger kids who are about now. What do you do with their kids who are already?
They have their
Yeah.
smartphone already, right?
that
Yeah,
are
they're on.
18 years old? They're in high school. They've already been like.
My best bet there, what I would suggest, and I do suggest to parents a lot, is try to engage in some conversations about it in which you likely will not be listened to, but bring it up and discuss it. And go, here's some things that I'm learning. Here's some concerns. Read that book, Dopamine Nation. You will have discussion points, guaranteed, where you can go, hey, can we talk about this for 10 minutes and enter into a discussion about it? And they may go, that's dumb. But if they get later on, if they find themselves struggling with it, they'll remember what you said. So we talk a lot about planting seeds with the parents that we work with whose kids are, 18, 19 already there, really kind of in that world. They bought their own phone, they're stuck in it. They're, they go, well, you can enter into some conversations about it and you can offer alternatives. And you can go, not at the dinner table. You can go out of your way to go, I'm going to have dinner every night at the table with you. I'm not going to have the phone at the table. I want to talk to you for 30 minutes, and see. And again, some kids won't do that and some will, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't try.
Mentioned earlier that some of this was kids that had addictive personalities were more likely to go down this path. How do we know if our kid has it?
I don't know. I don't know if anybody can answer that directly, because you can see that if anybody who does a lot of fairly addictive behavior, if you do a really strong drug like fentanyl, you're likely to get addicted no matter what, physically addicted. But some people, the difference between somebody who can gamble and a gambling addict who cannot stop and needs to be treated for it, I don't know how to spot that exactly. I don't know that anybody does. That's not really answered directly out there in our whole field. They can go, well, you can watch some behavior that seems prone to it. If you have somebody that, if they push the dopamine button, they will repeat despite any consequence. They will just keep doing it. I have parents that tell me in hindsight, I could see it with video games regularly. Before the kid got on drugs, I could see that the kid would have utter emotional meltdowns related to their video game access. I go, that's an interesting one. That was maybe telling you something early.
I mean, you're the expert for sure, right? But there is some evidence and research that indicates, right, like a genetic component to these things too. So, maybe just if it's a mom, a dad, a grandma, a grandpa, maybe a heightened awareness or, an older sibling or, something like that, just to kind of be tuned into it.
Yes, it does tend to run in families.
But it's so prevalent. So it's hard to like,
That's what it is. It's hard to put into one thing, but I'm glad you brought that up because they've done a lot of studies and they do think there's real genetic components, but they're not going to gene test everybody. And it's hard, but you can look at that and go, that was the case in my family. There's a lot of alcoholism in my family. So we do tell kids that when we speak at schools, like if there's alcoholism in your family, you are likely more prone,
One of the questions, and I don't know that there's an answer, you might have more, knowledge from your reading studies, but, look, video games are very different than they were when we were kids, right? So to have a kid have a meltdown, taking a game away from them may have to do with the way the games are set up. I mean, they are dopamine triggers. That doesn't necessarily correlate that they will have an addictive personality. They're stuck on the game right then and there. And if
they're
you've got-
addicted to the game.
right? But if you get them away from that game, that can change. I mean, that's, I think what you're talking about, that's part of the challenge,
It is.
right? The difference between the person that can stop at Vegas and pull a few slots and walk away, and the person that they drop that first one and they're there for 6 hours. You literally can't pull them away.
It's humans. So you're right. So you can't know how everybody's going to react. If you see things that are concerning, you do your best to engage conversations, maybe, put some limits where you need to. You're right. We see it in America with alcohol, right? A lot of Americans drink. They don't all drink alcohol.
Right.
So it's really hard to tell who's going to, but we can tell you more likely the younger. That we do know. Onset and the amount that you have access to that, I think it's probably a good idea for any kid to play those high dopamine games for 3 or 4 hours a day. And there's kids who do.
Well, post COVID, I mean, we had kids online all day long, whether they were playing games or other things, but their only relief once they got off of their school time was to play online. So it was a catch-22.
That's a huge catch-22. And another just an interesting video. Watch the TED Talk if you haven't seen it. Everything you know about addiction is wrong. He talks about the opposite of addiction is connection. It's a great talk. And that's a whole line of thinking that's out there in the world that I'm a huge subscriber to. It's Johan Hari is the speaker in the TED Talk.
I was just gonna say, I've seen actually brain scans that show that when kids are playing the video games, areas of the brains that are stimulated are the same areas that are stimulated when people do drugs. So they are getting some like high stimulation from that. So, I mean, to me, I could see tendency might go like they're getting older, the video games are doing it more. What else is going to create that?
It might be priming the
That
pump.
stimulation.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, with a lot of kids that we work with, we have substance use disorders. There is that. There was things prior to it. We do see video games a lot. We see a lot that their first thing that was high dopamine was pornography, male and female, both. But because the access to that is really young a lot. I think I don't remember the latest AYS. I'm from the 2018 Arizona Youth Survey. Our average onset for drugs in Arizona, I think, was 12 and a half years old. So if that's your average onset, it means people are starting younger. But I think I was talking, if you're familiar with the agency, Not My Kid, I was over there this week and I was talking with the CEO and we were talking about the pornography. And she says from their numbers that they're getting, she thinks it's closer to 10, 9 pornography, but that's really high dopamine stimulation also.
9 for pornography.
Yes, that's what they're thinking. She's getting that. I asked her, I said, where are you getting that stat? Who's coming out? She said, one of the websites they're getting is called Fight the New Drug. So it maybe that may be worth having a look at also.
Pornography coming.
That's where the access is. Absolutely. Well, it starts on social media a lot of times, but they kind of go down a rabbit hole from there. So, but that's another, they talk about that a lot in that Dopamine Nation book also, is I'm giving you references of things that I think will stick to that you can use. You could show a kid that TED Talk, the addiction one, you know, some of the things I'm saying that if you look at that book, Anna Lemke also does a podcast on Huberman Lab. It's great. Any kid could listen to it about understanding our brains and our bodies and addiction. And it gives some idea. And again, it's, I guess we're compared to anything else, the way that we do things, right? People get warned about it too, about how you eat and diabetes. Not everybody's going to listen, period. Right. But well, it doesn't mean we shouldn't tell them, you know, like these are some things to be aware of.
Well, and I mean, you know, I've read a bit about too, right? I mean, our sort of, and this isn't just kids, right? Our culture in the United States is very much one of like, we're very uncomfortable with anything other than like feeling good and feeling happy. And like, that's like a cultural thing. And we really, I think it's important to instill in ourselves and in our kids, like we're not going to be feeling good and happy all the time. And that's okay. And like to normalize that. And with social media, you're constantly seeing pictures of not people crying or struggling or feeling isolated or alone. You're seeing pictures of, you know, girls at beaches and, you know, having fun that they've staged. Right. And so having those real conversations, like it's not human nature to be happy all the time. That's okay. In order to be really happy, sometimes you have to feel those other emotions. It's okay. Let's sit with that. Let's talk about that, because that's like the escapism, right? Where it's like, you're just, whether it's video games, whether it's alcohol. And I think that as a culture, we've gotten sort of obsessed with this idea of like, we're supposed to feel good all the time. And that's just not reality. And it's also good and okay to sit with those other feelings too. So
I could not agree more with that mentality. It's why I work on the try to reduce demand side rather than supply when it comes to, I mean, I am glad that they're trying to stop fentanyl as much as they can from coming into the US, but part of me is like, well, we're the ones that want it.
right. I'll find something else.
Demand, right? Period. That has been for drugs for decades. So there's where our issue is how do we reduce that to the best of our ability with kids? How do we meet their needs in another way? It's meeting a need, right? If you ask a kid, that's one of the first things I ask a kid when we do their assessment. When they come in for treatment, is tell me everything good drugs did for you, so I know what needs it's meeting, and then we can develop your treatment plan. What are some other ways to meet those needs, right? It's because you're just going to take it away, just leave them. That's not going to work. They're going to go back to it. It's doing something.
That connection, like you were saying.
Yes, connection is often heavily built around connection. A sense of purpose goes a really long way. I have some sense of purpose in my life. It's huge.
Well, the kid from Hamilton, I mean, obviously, here's the sports team that this kid is involved in, and that's where the need is being met. You know, trying to get them away from that and yet keep them in the sports team is like saying, okay, you're an alcoholic and you're still going to go to the bar 3 nights a week with your friends. That's going to be really, really tough. There's no other way around that.
I go to funerals. I go to graduations. You know what I mean? I see kids like the Hamilton kid who's very successful now, grown up. But I also go to some funerals and I do see where it is where parents can't quite handle that. My kid's a star hockey player. I can't take him off the team. I'm like, he's using coke with all this, his life is at risk. Right. And then they bury that kid when he's 20. And I'm like, being a star hockey player or getting into the right college, it wasn't that important. He could have delayed college for 2 years and gone to treatment, you know.
There's a comment online. I don't know if you can speak to this at all. I know this, you're not an expert necessarily in like digital apps and stuff, but certain apps, this is going back to the access to porn. Certain apps are hacked and show pop-ups for porns. And so I don't know if you have any suggestions. This person saying, make sure you know what your kids are on and checking off. I don't know if there's a list of apps somewhere. So that might be that's a different presentation.
I do think it's a worthwhile presentation, and I do think that Katie McPherson does presents regularly to the school. Some of you might be familiar with her. I see some heads nodding, but I do think she does a presentation about that and knows considerably more than I've.
Right. So even if you're having these conversations with your kids and they're not seeking it out, like just to be aware that they might be using an app and it's being hacked and they're seeing horrific things there.
Seeking them out.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yes.
Right.
It's finding its way to.
yeah.
Absolutely. Any other questions? Direction I'm going to go along those lines.
Back to mine. It seems like this is a cycle of pushing that dopamine button. Is there any commonalities for what parents can look for to see if their child has that dopamine button pushing thing. If it's being their cell phone or if it's something else, how do you notice what they, how do we identify what it is that's giving them that dopamine rush?
I don't have a good answer. Pay attention if you see something that is negative that they're doing over and over, that they're gaining something from. Try to think about it that way. Like, how are they meeting their own needs? You know, how are they calming themselves down? Because the other side is if they're getting it from something positive, encourage it. They're getting it some dopamine. If they keep baking you things and they're like, Mom, check this out, and they're happy and everyone loves what they cook, buy them a mixer, encourage that in any way, shape, and form that you can, that if they're getting it from something positive. If you see it from something negative, or they're pushing that or something that you're concerned about, I do think address it and have discussions about it and arm yourself with as much information, more than I will be able to give you here. It's worth reading. It's our society right now. All this stuff, dopamine, addiction, smartphones, drugs, is worth boning up on and spending time on, because your kids have to navigate it differently than you did. And I'm going to use a somewhat analogy here, if it's okay. This doesn't answer your question, but I think it helps parents feel a little bit better. This is a metaphor that I use. A father raises his child, teaches them how to play baseball, throw a baseball, and play catch, and they learn how to bat, and they're super focused. They know all the rules. This kid knows everything about how to play baseball, right? As he's a kid, and he grows up, and the world tosses the kid of football. It's a generational gap in what we can teach because we can't see it. So we have to spend a lot of time going, what is their worldview like right now? As much of that as you can see, like what might be creating you a lot of discomfort, and can I help you cope with that in a positive way? And listen to them. I get that from kids all the time. And I don't think that it's 100% accurate. I hear a lot of kids go, I don't feel like my parents are listening. And I don't think that their parents aren't trying to listen. I think that they're using tools that work for them as adults or worked for them in the world as it was when they were kids. So it's easy for us to go, well, here's what I did. But if I didn't deal with TikTok, here's what I did to friends. Making friends is different today. The way they even talk about it with each other is different. And so trying to spend real time to get their worldview can go a long way. Because it can help you go, what are you coping with? And how can I help you become resilient so that you feel that you can navigate? It's good. Sometimes that can, you can add other mentors in your life. Sometimes they don't want to talk about it with mom and dad a ton. So other positive adults go a really long way for your kid. That may be a coach or an uncle or older sibling, or access to other positive adults that you, particularly if you know they'll give similar messaging to you, that aren't going to go the other direction on for what your parenting values are. And that, I know we're in a time where those are being very widely, but there's somebody in your kid's life reflects your values to some. There is probably as much of that community as they can get to reinforce. So I wish I had a little better answer to that other than try to watch. If you do see things that surround, major emotional meltdowns, attend to them to the best of your ability.
Is there any danger in just sort of assuming like we all have that potential, our kids all have that potential, and so just
That's how I
proceed as if the kind of switch is on and something could trigger it at any moment? Because that's how I live my life. Great. That's really great.
That's kind of how I see it too. Is just don't see it, and I've been really honest with my children whole life. Like, you got a lot of alcoholism in your family, myself and their mother, both in recovery. There's a lot of alcoholisms throughout our families, and they've known that their whole lives. You are, if you pick something up, you are likely to like it, average person. And that's dangerous.
Because like somebody said, like it's like a generation of kids that are primed already.
Yeah.
So it's different than even what we've all experienced. So I think it's maybe sadly fair to sort of say they are all at a heightened risk because of that, right?
Yeah.
So
I think it's trying to figure out where they're finding their joy. And I think sometimes as parents, we just don't know. I don't think we're privy, especially with teenagers, necessarily at what, they're doing. I've got one in college, and I'm like just trying to find out what's going on, what's happening. Thankfully, I do know what's going on, at least with some things, and get an opportunity for that conversation. But a lot of people don't have those conversations with their kids. Those kids go off to college and you know, and there's little to no communication.
And I think that we can tend to, as parents, ask about things that are very future related. How are your grades? How is school? Because we're thinking about how you're going to be. As opposed to, what are you doing for fun? Like, what's the best thing you've done in the past month? What's the most fun? We don't tend to ask as many of those kind of questions. Right? What would you like to do? What would be a new thing you would like to try? We tend to go with, how are your grades? How are this? You know, did you get to practice on time? Can be that kind of over-structured adult, American adult. We got crap to do. You know what I mean? We move, you know, and kids don't live in that world. That's not, and I think we can lean on over preparing them for that full time rather than going, you're still a kid, you're 15, 16 years old. You know, goofing off with your buddies. I used to get teased by my uncle all the time about loitering places, but I did. We loitered all the time. We sat around, you know what I mean? It did nothing. And then something, I created a lot of trouble and made trouble, but we did a lot of that. It was valuable to me, you know, at the time. And again, and it may be things that adults have a hard time seeing the value in, you know, and going, this is a waste of time. Because it might be a waste of your time, but it may not feel like a waste of time to have 15, 16. So it's not negative. No. Engage in it with them.
So for those parents out there, I think of a friend of mine who's, you know, just caught their kids vaping with THC, right? And it's, you know, a 16-year-old, you know, what are the steps that they can take, you know, other than taking the phone away, right? I mean, it's already there. They already have access. They know where to get it. So the parent's not buying it. You know, what are the steps you can recommend that those parents take?
So I think one of them is get an evaluation somewhere. There's programs that do it. A lot of them do. We do it at no cost. And there's programs all over the valley. And it sends the message either whether they need to be in treatment right now or not. Maybe it was their first time. It sends the message right from the jump. This is serious. This is not something I'm just going to blow over, because if they blow over it, the kid is likely to do it again. That I have seen over and over and over again. We are concerned about this. And then the next things I suggest is a lot of conversations with parents, you know, whether they're split together, whatever, just get on the same page. Where do we stand with marijuana use, and make it really clear? Here's where we are with it. If you got it hanging around with these kids, then I'm going to call all of these kids' parents, and we're going to talk about it. I mean, that means the parent getting uncomfortable, though, because the parents a lot of times don't want to make that phone call because they're going to think, all the parents are going to think I'm the parent with the druggie, right? And so they don't want to get uncomfortable, but it works the best when we call every parent and go, I just caught my kid. I'm not accusing your kid of anything. I just caught my kid at the THC vape. He's been hanging around with your kid, and here's where my husband stand with it. My husband and I stand with it. But, you know, this is where we are. If you make that really clear, even it kind of puts the message out to the other parents. Most parents are looking for that. I get parents all the time that bring their 16-year-olds in that have drug problems. Like, we felt like the only parent. And these come a lot of times, to be honest, from the wealthiest neighborhoods. If I'm really being thick, it's the parts of Ahwatukee and Chandler, they come, they go, well, other parents seem to not care. They let them do it in the house. They look the other way. They, you know, and we feel like we're the weird parents for putting up boundaries about it. You don't want to feel weird about that. You want to be clear about that with your kids and your kids' parents. That way, you know, my kids hang around with the kid that's using, then they catch them a second time with the same kids. That kid's not coming to the house anymore. You're not going there. And tell them why. If a little bit of education for the parent says, I've learned this about THC, I've learned this about addiction. If they just learn a little bit about it, and I at least want you to delay till you're 25 before you mess with this stuff. Now, the kid may not delay till you're 25, but it is a clear answer. It is, your likelihood of becoming addicted is less at that age than any age before it, period. And it gives them something concrete, you know, give it time, at least delay. And I'm going to do everything I can to stop it and be prepared to engage.
So you say be evaluated. Where are you going to be evaluated? What are you searching online to go for an evaluation?
You can look up a local counselor next to your home, you know, a substance abuse counselor, look up a substance abuse program. And I think it is a good idea to specifically look for somebody who works with substance use, because they're gonna have more of that information. Your average LPC is gonna know about some of that addiction, they're not focused on it a ton, and this kid may really need a ton. Let me give you all the information, whether he's gonna do it again. Really clear, down to earth information about addiction and how it forms, so at least you know. And then the parents also know, so we go, okay, this is what we're potentially dealing with, this is why we don't want you using.
And in your experience, you don't have to wait until you know your kid has an addiction. One time, that's your stake in the ground, as you said, we're gonna go check out the
Yes.
counseling.
We're gonna do something. This is not, or and if it's a consequence, that you stick to it. But if it's a real, hey, you can't have the phone for 6 months, or if you were with these kids and they caught you, I'm calling all the parents, and these kids can't come to the house until, for a couple of months. But whatever it is there, it needs to really happen. Again, wishy-washy about it. Think of what they're up against all day. The people that they watch on social media, the music that they listen to says, this is no problem, this is fine. Using drugs is normal, right? And I like to use it's common, not normal. I tell parents, it's like, just because it's common doesn't mean, normal makes it sound like it's eating kale. It makes it sound completely innocuous. Use that. And kids love to use that. That's their judge of the world a lot. Is a lot of people are doing it, it makes it okay. And everybody's susceptible to that to some degree. We are as adults too. Like, what are the other moms doing? You know what I mean? What are the other dads doing at the soccer game? How much are they yelling? We gauge our behavior by other people. There's nothing abnormal about that, but teenagers are extreme of that, right? They are, if I see that a lot of kids vape THC, then I can use that. That's a weapon against mom and dad, right? It's normal, it's normal, it's normal. It's important, it's not normal to us. And it may be common, doesn't make it okay. But there's a lot of discussions that have to happen. And I suggest starting the discussions young. If you know that their first talks about it are going to come from their peers, that means they're already going to have ideas, which you're dealing with at 18. Their ideas are formed a lot of times before mom and dad get to them to go, let me talk to you about drugs and addiction a little bit. So they come in with an idea formed. My favorite musician smokes pot on stage every time he performs. And so it's fine. And he's rich, and I'm going to be rich. I'm an influencer. It gets that whole thing going. That way of looking at the world. So I think the sooner the better when it comes to engaging in the conversations about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Happy birthday, Nicole. Appreciate that.
If I can do anything, feel free to call me anytime, send an email, I'll send you anything. I have a few links on the email that you can pass on to.
Yeah.